Delighted to have such a meaningful topic with some of the most courageous people I know. I want to thank everyone for joining us here. This topic is one that many people don't think enough about. And Matt, maybe I'll start just by acknowledging your leadership on this topic. For those who don't know Matt, he lives in Colorado Springs, right? Monument. I knew it. Somewhere down there. And on his regional panel, you heard it said, I think, did Holly Williams say it, which is, or someone said it, we talk about a victim advocate sometimes, but we don't always talk about how we advocate people who've lost loved ones. And so thinking about how different systems, our public health systems, our criminal justice systems, shows up for affected families is a topic that, Matt, you've done a lot of leadership on. So I really want to thank you and appreciate you being here. Randy said you can ask me whatever you want. Randy, County Commissioner Clear Creek, called me up, or maybe I called you after you'd lost your daughter, and talked about, I want to be involved in this work. And I know many people in this work come to it having had a family member who is either in recovery or who passed. And thank you for that commitment. I mentioned earlier, Tricia and Jason, about Keith. And I talked about when we do work on medication addiction treatment, we think about people who found themselves in the criminal justice system and told, I'm sorry, there's no treatment available for you. And we gave out 5 awards this morning for jails that are making sure that what happened to Keith doesn't happen ever again. And I really appreciate you both being here to join us. Ayelet, you and I go way back. Dr. Talmy is one of the leaders at Judy's House, who's one of the grantees we announced. And the mission is to support families in just the position we're in. And so coming from the caregiver side is something that brings a lot to this conversation. And I mentioned earlier the commitment of parents that we have at this table. And I was able to meet Julie when we were at I think it was the Take Back Day that happens regularly. I think there's one coming up. Please tell me where you're going to be so I can join you again. Julie established a foundation in honor of her daughter, Maddie, who, like way too many people, ended up getting what became a deadly dose of fentanyl. And you've been focused on how we raise more awareness and how we ensure that we have naloxone everywhere we can to save lives. Building that foundation and pursuing justice for Maddie, I know, have been part of what you've made your mission, and thank you for that leadership and courage. I want to start on this topic and honestly just want to have a real conversation and bring others in, and I'll start with those who are still finding purpose through their pain. And Randy, I'll start with you. It takes a lot of courage to do that. When you and I chatted, you were pretty clear about your direction, but can you just talk about that? Because one of the other points is when someone is in pain, how do you see them? How do you support them? Not everybody is going to want to find a voice. How did you find yours, and how do we all support those who are still mourning a family member taken by this crisis?
Sure. I think that guidance for people, well, first, there are a couple of questions there. First of all, I don't know if you've met politicians before that run for office, but, you know, in terms of finding the courage to grab a microphone and talk all day, it's really a forte of mine anyway. So first I just want to speak to my experience for a second, just to bring it clear and home. Just my daughter had had problems for quite a few years, 25 years. She was 40 when she died this last December. She was a really bright spot, but who also had a really hard, tough side because she was a very sensitive person. And so she was in and out of addiction over years. And last July 5th, a guy named Garrett Chandler posted on Facebook, a young man who had a lot of disabilities, was in a wheelchair working at Safeway and having to still support himself through what means and funding he could get, as well as working, pushing carts out of the parking lot, and everybody in town loved him. He posted on July 5th that he was trying to come out of addiction. He was reveling that. He had made it, and he wanted to make a life out of speaking from stages to help people. And he, on September the 25th, he died of a fentanyl overdose. And I looked back at the post today, and I saw a little heart at the bottom where my daughter had posted on his post in July. And then on December the 23rd, my wife and I were getting ready to go down to Denver to do some shopping, and my daughter was outside. She was living with us with her son, our grandson, and she'd been having some trouble for a few days, but she seemed to be feeling better. And she was putting up an inflatable Santa riding on a Harley thing I'd never seen before in our front yard, and I went, I'm good with that. I love it. Put it on the roof is what I felt, And we told her we were leaving to go shopping, and we came home that night and didn't see her and thought she'd gone to spend the night with a friend that she went to talk with or hang out with and spend the night. The next day came by, and my wife got soup ready that evening after we did some more things getting ready for Christmas. So it's Christmas Eve about 8 o'clock, and I said, did you text Laura and let her know dinner's ready? Yeah. Did you hear anything back? No. Did you hear anything back? Did we ever hear from her since last night? No. We need to go to Haley's now. Agreed. Went down to Haley's, checked. Haley hadn't seen her since about the time we left the day before. I now realize why they probably talked about 1:30 about the time we left. I later learned that Haley was her supplier. And so we went down to Haley's place, found out she wasn't there. She hadn't seen her. We drove back home. My storage shed that she'd occasionally use as a she shed with 3-generation family. I saw the light on. We banged on the door. Couldn't get a response. I went inside, drilled out the handle, looked through and saw part of her inside, could see she was in there, and then just took the hammer and the crowbar and just screaming and just pounding on it as hard as I could, broke the door open. She'd been dead for about 30 hours. And once I tried to move her, and she was stiff, then I just stood up and grabbed my wife and said, I'm sorry, she's gone. And my grandson screamed and ran into the night. What I want to tell you is that the people that we're here to talk about that we lost today are people who aren't really abnormal and different than us. They're just like us, and by blind luck do we not go if we haven't gone there, especially in today's fentanyl market. And so we're all damaged goods at one time or another. And the most helpful things I would say you can do for someone in our position at that moment when you're in a Stephen King movie is to provide comfort to the extent they will allow. And that can be making sure they have food. They'll tell you no, they don't need it. But we were just told you have to take this. They started a meal train, neighbors did, and started bringing us food every night, so we didn't have to think about it and could process. Let them know that no matter how dysfunctional they feel, everybody has a bad mental health moment. We are all mentally ill or have mental behavioral and mental health problems at one time or another, depending on when we were most recently damaged by something. Certainly wasn't mentally well in the hours that followed that, in the days that followed that. I thought I was behaving normally, and I seemed to everyone outwardly, but inside all this stuff was raging. Enable them an outlet if you can. Take them somewhere if they need to get away from the home and away from others for a little while. Ask them if they're getting help. And remind them that no matter what, they're normal. And whatever you do, don't pretend to know what they went through. Everybody here at this table lost a kid. We were just talking about that a minute ago. I don't know their story and their pain. I don't know what happened in their lives and their child's lives. And There's nobody here that I know exactly how it happened for them. I just shared mine as closely as I can because I wanted you to feel it as well as you could. Anyway, I think I'm talking too long right now, and I promised I would.
Randy, that was beautiful, and I want to publicly acknowledge Tricia and Jason have said to me, please keep telling Keith's story, keep his memory alive. And I was at a gala for a Naloxone project. Many of you know the work they're doing, and told the story, and it came back to you in a way that I take it was meaningful. And I want to tell you why it means so much to me, because we've been working on this issue. You heard earlier today about medication addiction treatment in the jails. And I learned from Dr. Leslie Brooks, who's here somewhere, the two most important places to help people get treatment are the emergency room and the jail. So if you do nothing else, make sure people can get help. But I knew that like as an intellectual, thing. But when you talked about having Keith, I'm like, that's what we don't want to have happen. And so I really appreciate you allowing me to tell the story and you telling the story. And just following Randy, just whatever's on your mind about the person who you lost and how it shaped your journey, please share it with us.
Hi, I'm Tricia Rounds. We lost our 20-year-old son, Keith Rounds, on April 2nd of 2021. Keith was, I'm not biased when I say this, he truly was one of the most intelligent kids I've ever met in my life. To know Keith was to learn. Any room Keith walked in, it would turn into a teaching moment for even the wisest person. When you would sit down and have a conversation with hours for Keith and talk about how things work and why they work the way they do. But in that, Keith also struggled with severe mental health. He had ADHD. He was diagnosed with Tourette's. He was put on mandatory 72-hour hold in mental health hospitals on 3 different occasions when he was younger. We were told that he had bipolar and also had signs of schizophrenia and maybe on the spectrum as well. Keith was in his very last hold there at one of the mental health hospitals. We were told that he needed to be admitted for a long-term stay just to help him because the way his brain was wired, he just needed some more help and to learn life skills on how his brain was wired. And they were going to admit him, but they called us 3 days later and said, your son needs to be picked up because your insurance won't cover the stay. And we didn't have the $60,000 to pay for it. So Keith came home and we still struggled. Fast forward, Keith was really struggling when he was 16, 17 years old. And we did everything we could to get him help through the things we could afford as far as reaching out to like the jails or the police departments. Got him on the Boys Council with the Northland Police Department, all sorts of different things that we could find to help him. And nothing was helping. We reached out to the state of Colorado after they implemented the Colorado House bill after the Aurora Theater shootings. And they said that we were the first family they were going to use that for, so they tried to figure out how he was going to get help through that, but it wasn't working. And fast forward more, Keith ended up, he was living in our backyard in a camper for a while when he turned 19, and we told him, that's not the right way to live, you just need to come inside, and he just wanted to be on his own. So he rented a room from a family. It was a single family home, nice yard, 2-car garage. When we went over there to look at the home, there was a mom in the kitchen with a baby, a 1-year-old baby cooking a steak dinner, and we were like, oh, this is going to be good for him. Like, he's going to be good here. Come to find out, it was a human trafficking ring house. And we tried everything to get Keith out of this house. We found our nephew had committed suicide while we were trying to get him out of this house, and Keith got even deeper in with them during that time, and he went to jail. We found out on Thanksgiving that Keith it was fentanyl that they had got him addicted to. Keith went to jail, and he said that he was relapsing, I think, or detoxing, and they gave him something to help the detox, because you can die from fentanyl when you're detoxing from that. And I said, you need to get help, like, talk to them. I called them. They said I couldn't get him help, and I told him he needed to ask them himself, so he did, and they put him on a waiting list. Keith came home from jail, and he died 10 days later because somebody came to our house and brought him a pill. Fast forward a little bit, we found him in our home. My husband found him, and he tried everything to save him, but it was too late. Fast forward to after his death, we got Keith's phone, and there was all kinds of messages and videos of him. Researched internet. How did my life get here? How did I end up to this? We found out that these evil people that sunk their evil claws in him were lining him up execution style, along with other young kids his age, and beating them if they didn't do what they were told. And there was lots of messages in his phone about this. And when I confronted the detectives, they said at the end of the day, your son chose to be involved in that and get a pill. So if there's any message that I could give, along with everything else I could sit here for hours and hours and talk about to help families, it's have more compassion. The stigma regarding, kids getting pills, whether they knew it was fentanyl or they were going for a Percocet. Like, at the end of the day, our son was 20 years old, and he didn't know how to get help. He didn't know what resources were out there. And I feel that him coming out of jail, being put on a waiting list, he should have had more help. He should have known from the powers that the people that were in positions of power and knowledge and professionals, he should have known where to go to get help, at least until he was, the waiting list was up. Like, there just should have been more for him, and he knew nothing, and his phone was full of videos of him crying. Videos of his face being bashed in from people that were beating him up, like if he didn't do what he was supposed to do, and he just didn't know how to get the help. And I just feel like there should have been a lot more resources for him upon leaving that jail that night. I'm rambling now too much.
No, not at all. Amen.
I will. The other thing is, like, I don't know if there's any victim advocates in here, but I don't know if victim advocates follow up differently after something tragedy happens. But with us, they came the day that we found our son, passed and handed us a bunch of papers and said a bunch of words, and then after that there was no follow up. It wasn't until days later, when people started asking me about his funeral, that I realized I was supposed to do something. It was at that moment that I realized I may not have had the best support system personally, because then I realized I needed to start making calls. And when I called the funeral home, they said, I explained everything that was going on, and they said, well, if we don't get possession of your son's body within the next few hours, you won't be able to say goodbye like the way that you want to. So I just wish I had someone follow up with me within the days after or weeks after, to tell me what I was supposed to do next, because I realized weeks later that the information was in what was given to me the day that they came to my house, but we had just lost our son. We were in complete turmoil and shock, and I just wish someone would have followed up and said, hey, there's some things you need to do, to get your son's funeral arranged and whatnot. I just feel like that's what victims advocates are supposed to do. I'll give it to the AG. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I think we're good here. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Riviere. I live down in the Monument down near Colorado Springs. In July of 2021, I lost my two sons, Andrew and Stephen Riviere, of a fentanyl poisoning. They were trying what they thought was OxyContin for the first time. It turned to be laced with a deadly amount of fentanyl, and they died side by side in their beds in Colorado Springs. And Andrew was 21 and Stephen was 19. My only 2 kids. I knew nothing about the drug culture. Wanted to be a Navy pilot, so that wasn't part of my life. I knew nothing of fentanyl. When the coroner called me to let me know they think it might be a fentanyl poisoning, I had no idea what that drug was. I thought it was what killed Michael Jackson. I found out later that it killed Prince. I never got to have the conversation with my boys. We had very open conversations. They had done marijuana. They had gone into high-potency THC, and so that's kind of how their journey developed. We had those open conversations. It wasn't allowed in our house, even when they started to vape, but I knew nothing of fentanyl. I couldn't warn my boys about this, and since then I've been drinking through a fire hose. And I think about my boys is that, you know, I look at my kids. They were good kids that made a number of bad choices. They both had mental health issues. My oldest struggled with bipolar. My youngest struggled with anxiety and depression. And they were functional. My youngest was a 4.2 plus GPA, wrestled 26-0 as an 8th grader, was trained by people around the Olympics in wrestling, graduated the AA degree. My oldest was really talented musician, playing music, making music, really good with his hands. And so it's really led me to advocate definitely about family advocate. We did that in the El Paso Region 16, that we have a family advocate now to help people like us as we go through that, to help us navigate, because we are drowning when you lose your kids so suddenly. And so that's something that our ROAC has brought in, which has been fantastic. And I can't wait to see the support that that position is going to bring to our part of Colorado Springs. And it's just led me to advocate. I've worked with the rounds. We've testified before the House and the Senate to pass the Fentanyl Accountability Act, which was a great step to bring some legislation that we needed to put the right people in behind bars, and also to really help with all the different things that this act has done. So, you know, we're just up here just to share our lives. It's certainly challenging. We were talking about when we come to these events, it's hard to share, but, you know, tonight we'll pay for it. But we want you to know that by sharing our stories, sharing our kids' lives, there are so many people out there that are struggling today, whether it's addiction or these things that the Rounds family went through, or like my boys that were just clueless, completely clueless, that they were taking something thinking they were going to have a good time, and they never woke up.
I just want to say one more point that's foundational to all this work, and it responds very well to what Tricia said, which is every life matters, and that we have to address the fact that there's this stigma out there that, as you put it, really lacks compassion. And part of what's so important about this work is honoring that principle and making sure that others don't experience what you experience, because what you need to know, there was a deadly crime that was committed, and the person who brought that fentanyl at a time that was so vulnerable for Keith, because of the law you guys worked to pass, now we need to be prosecuting those crimes. And I understand it didn't happen in your case, and we need to keep that driving us forward. And again, Matt, thanks for your leadership. Whatever you're comfortable sharing, Julie.
Thank you so much, Attorney General, and thank you. It's one of those where you're not alone, so it's nice to sit up here with other parents. None of us want to be up here. I'm very thankful for everybody that's taking the time to listen or watching remotely. I am Julie with Maddie Wright Foundation, and I'll speak a little bit about that, but first off, I wanted to talk about my daughter, Maddie. She's right here. She's my only child. She really, when you talk about somebody that lit up a room, was her. Full of energy, she joined and quit every club and sport there was to do. She just loved people. I was thinking as we opened this morning and the Attorney General was talking with hundreds in the room, Maddie would be the one kind of surveying the room, checking to see who might be looking at the ground, looking nervous, looking insecure. She's the type that would just plop a seat right up next to him and give him a compliment and check and see how they're doing. That's just the type of person Maddie is, shining still down. In 2020, at age 23, Maddie was employed at the La Meridian Hotel downtown Anybody that's staying at the hotel and checked in, that would have been Maddie's smiling face to give you your hotel key. She was also in esthetician school. She did all of the legwork to get the school accredited with the state on a full ride scholarship. It was something she just set her mind to and was enrolled. As all of us remember, COVID hit. All of a sudden, she was not able to go into work. They furloughed all of the hotel employees. She at the time was so worried about other people, you know, people around my age and other mothers and how they were going to afford their bills. She was no longer able to go and work on esthetician on skin because nobody had contact at the time. As vibrant and lovely as Maddie was, she suffered from anxiety, most of the time worried of others. So a day went by. On September 8th, her friends hadn't heard from her, I hadn't heard from her. On September 9th, I get a call. She lived on her own, paying her own bills, and her roommate, her childhood friend, calls upset. She's not breathing, called 911. She lived 8 minutes away from me, raced down there. I'm hysterical, trying to get into the house. Police barricade, I'm screaming in the street, help her, help her. I'm asked, did your daughter ever use drugs? I'm screaming, yes, she's used Xanax before, help her, help her. I met with a, sorry, your child overdosed and case closed and that's that. So for 2 months before the autopsy came, I'm thinking an overdose. To me, and I think the majority of this nation, an overdose to us is like a handle of vodka and piles of pills. I'm thinking something, you know, I'll never have an answer, but that must have happened. And then the autopsy arrived. She had one pill she took, a blue pill that she thought was an oxy to sleep. It was pure fentanyl, nothing else in her system, and that one small pill was 15 times the lethal dose. My heart sank, and then things started to connect. She had a very terrible predator that she had met years before and had a restraining order against. This person manipulated, abused financially, physically, emotionally, and she had distanced herself from this person. But with the COVID shutdowns, this person was unrelentless. And they said, hey, Maddie, you can trust me here, just take this one pill to sleep. I'm confident Maddie thought, I'll never die from a pill. Okay, probably shouldn't be doing it, but I'll take this pill. This person that she knew and had a restraining order left her for dead for over 30 hours. I had to become an investigator, do all the legwork to get a detective finally to listen, take the case. They did amazing work, turned around charges within a month. The unfortunate thing is, the charges got filed 8 days past a 3-year statute, and the judge threw out the case. In the time that those 3 years, this particular person was caught without them even being aware, dealing drugs with a menu on Facebook by undercover Denver police on numerous times. So I thought, okay, they weren't able to help on Maddie's case, but they will come through on this distribution. The DA worked very hard on it. There is piles of evidence, and that same judge that threw out the case 8 days too late gave this person a flat 90 days. There's really, when I try to even retell it, it sounds like an unbelievable story. I will continue to pursue. We are doing a great job in this room of bringing together all sorts of different avenues and outlets and resources. We really need judges to get on board as well. After I found out about the single pill, I started Googling because I thought, how did this happen? This has to be a strange occurrence. This just cannot be. And that's when I found out that this is the leading cause of death. Many, many kids, all similar stories, took a single pill. They didn't know, they were not seeking particular fentanyl. They just received it. And so we started Maddie Wright Foundation to do public outreach. And I'll speak more about that. I'm rambling on again, too.
No, thank you. Let me shift to, we've gotten a lot from the stories. How do we support those families? Because so many family members who are the survivors can get forgotten about painfully, even by the criminal justice system, and a lack of the sort of victim advocate and other services. Where do we start this work about supporting families?
So first I want to say and acknowledge the courage, the vulnerability, and the strength that it takes to get up every day and tell and share these stories. And for everyone in the room and everyone in attendance, the work that we are doing is essential to save lives and to ensure that every person has dignity and humanity and respect and opportunity to survive and thrive. So I'm really very honored to be seated here with all of you. At Judy's House and JAG Institute, we believe that no child, no family should be alone in grief. In 2022, 1 out of 4 children who lost a parent lost that parent as a result of an accidental overdose or poisoning. 1 out of 4 bereaved children. That number is astronomical. Cause of death does not change bereavement and grief. And so we really feel very strongly that there have to be places, services, and supports immediately after a death loss that treat people who are grieving with the respect and understand and value their loved ones, regardless of whether they have been struggling with mental health issues, with substance use, or whether it was a sudden, accidental, unexpected death. And oftentimes it's all of that at the same time. And there is so much stigma, we heard that word, and shame and lack of recognition of what is happening in our systems of care. We leave people for days, weeks, months, and years without answers. So we really focus on, in that fog of grief, what do families need? How do we help them connect? And we think about postvention, because at Judy's House we're dealing with childhood bereavement, right, and family bereavement. So someone is already dead. When we can address that grief and create spaces where people get support that they need and are able to share their stories and are not alone, because we have a group-based model. So families get connected with other families who have experienced similar death losses. We group actually by cause of death. So sudden, unexpected deaths are together. It's a very different process than when you lose somebody after a long battle with cancer, for example. Still grief, but really different, right? And so thinking about how do we provide those supports and think about that postvention as prevention, as an opportunity for families to grieve, to heal, and to not perpetuate cycles where you don't have treatment and your grief goes undetected, and then you're in danger of suffering from behavioral health issues, right? Or from family disruptions. So I'll stop there.
Matt, I want to get some questions from the audience, but first I want you to talk about what you mentioned before, the initiative that you're working on and you've really spearheaded, providing that family support. Obviously, I think what we've heard from every single family member here, they didn't have what you're working to build. So to talk about that.
Sure, thank you, A.G. Weiser. You know, like I said earlier, when you go through this, it's so disorienting. When I found out at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, you know, I ran around my house screaming my head off in complete shock, and then the next thing I know, I have got to, you know, get these kids' remains. I've got to get the funeral plan. There's so much to be done, and you're in a complete fog. And that fog, that grief fog, lasts a long time. And, you know, when I was asked to be on the ROAC in Region 16 as an affected parent to give my perspective, D.A. Allen had brought up, hey, Matt, why don't you share your experience? And really from that discussion, it was birthed that just as a victim of a violent crime, they get support, which is instrumental in their recovery and how to navigate the legal system. We realized as parents that we need support. We don't know what to do. It's a complete fog. We need somebody to guide us through. And so in Region 16, that was one of the awards that we've done, is to have a family advocate where they'll walk that family or the other remaining family through the crisis, to provide what resources are available in the county, to be able to give them some financial compensation for their kids' memorial, their loved ones' memorial, to be able to provide a playbook of here's who you can contact so that you can plan the services and go through that. And so this is new for us, but we're just trying to figure it out. And I think it's these stories, A.G. Weiser, that are powerful to help craft, and hopefully some of the other regions can take note of that, because it is a huge need. And unresolved grief causes all sorts of issues. And I know going through it, still going through it, had I had a family advocate, that would have been incredibly helpful. Thankfully, I had an incredible support system. But that, again, is what we're doing down in Region 16.
Questions from the audience? I've got one more I want to ask Randy, but then I'll start calling on people. You mentioned this, Randy, sidebar to me, so I want to ask, how do we do better about the stigma? Because I worry how many people are living in shame, afraid to talk about it. You all are incredibly courageous. Every life matters. Every life deserves dignity. And yet, there's a lot of stigma around this. And for us to really address this crisis, we're going to need to do something about it.
Well, there are only 8 billion of us on this planet, and we've got to stick together. So we've got to recognize our common worth, all of us. It's easy to look at a case and try to excuse that my case is different. The cases are all the same. Somebody reached out for something not under the guidance of a doctor, either therapeutically to themselves or whatever. We all do what we have to do to get through life. And once we know that we're all there, that we're all on this bus together, I think it helps a lot. For myself as a county commissioner, one thing that was very telling for me in the first little bit was that sometimes people look at my life and they think it's very privileged, and it is to the extent that I've got certain advantages and other people have their advantages, and that's all there is. About 2 days after my daughter died, I had a call from another county commissioner who told me that he had to identify his daughter's body in a bag frozen in a field for 3 days after in town in Denver. He comes from a rural county in southern Colorado, and I was shocked to hear that. It helped to know that I wasn't alone, that there was somebody else out there. And then I realized I wasn't alone. Honestly, it extrapolates to this in the end, that because you're all out there, and we're all part of the same thing, and we all have value in our lives, and every person. And it was only about 2 weeks later I went to my first CCI conference after my daughter died, or first CCI meeting, Colorado Counties Incorporated, Organization of County Commissioners. Another county commissioner came up to me and said, you know, my daughter-in-law died of a fentanyl overdose. And the first thing I thought was, there's only 200 of us in the damn state. That's 3 out of 200, and I haven't even talked to the other 197 commissioners yet. What's going on? So that's county commissioners. And people tend to look at us and think, all of us, including you, Phil, sorry about this, as an elected official, that we're way more important than we are. We're actually normal human beings that bought some yard signs. And yeah, we're part of you and you're part of us. We're all the same thing. I think, let me just say that I think that there are a number of things we can do to reduce stigma. I have to tell this story. I have to tell the story about the other county commissioners that it happened to. I have to be fearless in this. I'm any better than you are. And I don't care if you came out of a gated community this morning or whether you slept behind a dumpster last night. We're all in this thing together and we have to stick together. One of the things Clear Creek County was to build a collaborative care clinic, and we fought to get that done for several years and raised a bunch of money for it, really hard. And some of the arguments we had along the way were, did we need 2 entrances into the building? Did we need to have 1 entrance for public health care and 1 for private health care? 1 for mental health, 1 for physical health? It's like, no, we got 1 door into this place. The finishes are the same everywhere. Everyone's treated the same. If somebody comes into this place, we don't care whether they crawled out from behind a dumpster or came out of a gated community. The people that you need are there. Nobody knows why you came here, and you're all equally important because we did this for everybody. And that was a really big thing for us to try to do in our county. I think that came from Karen McNeil Miller, who told me about, especially in rural Colorado or rural counties and communities across the state, that you normally have a resource center where people can go get public health. And but everybody knows Joe, and they all know he's got that blue pickup, and Joe's not going to let his pickup be seen parked outside that place, so he never goes and gets help. And I think when we know that we're all in it together and we value everyone, one very rewarding thing, and then I'll be done, Phil. I was giving Karen McNeil Miller, who told me this story, she helped fund it to the tune of $1 million towards this clinic. And we were giving her the tour of the clinic, and as I started to get on the elevator and go down, there was a guy sitting in a mask outside the public health office, and he said, "Hey, Randy," and I didn't know who he had a mask on. It was a guy that I knew that was seriously addicted in our town, the little town I live in Empire. And I said, "Ron?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I came for help. I heard there's finally a place I can get help." And he looked really pleased to be sitting in this brand new building. He finally felt good about going to public health because he was as good as we were and we were no better. It was huge to do that. It was huge for everybody to know that you don't have to be ashamed of who you are. We all have problems at times in every house and every family. And just, we got to stick together.
It's really a great facility and a credit to Clear Creek for making it happen. All right, questions from the audience? All right, Aaron, I'm going to let you ask the question then.
I'm just struck by the stories. Thank you all for sharing so much. I think one of the things that I heard is this vacuous emptiness that all of you experienced at this terrible moment of grief. And it doesn't sound like any of you are living in spaces where you don't have neighbors. There are people all around us, and yet we all feel so alone and isolated. And I think not only is that correlated with misuse of substances, but also with this grief cycle. And I'm just sitting here wondering, what can we do to build better connections with our neighbors and friends?
Let me add to that, and then I'm going to let everyone quick round robin on this one. It's a good note to end on. The opposite of addiction, it said, is not sobriety, it's connection. And obviously, all of you in this time of grief need connection, but in both cases, it's not always easy to find it. How have you found connection? How can this community, we all better, as you put it so well, Randy, show up for one another and build that connection we need? Ayala, I'm going to let you go first, and I'll end with Randy.
I think, one of our mantras at Judy's house is we are all connected. So I so appreciate this. We connect families in a space that is family friendly. If any of you ever want to come and tour, it's magnificent. And we start everything that we do with meals for families because we recognize, I think Randy, you said meal train or something. We recognize that families, when they are in the fog of grief, should not be alone and need help with just the basic everyday things. It's so hard to get the rest of your family anywhere on a regular day without grief. And so I think really emphasizing and understanding the complex needs, transportation, meals, financial help, help with SSI applications, anything. I love the idea of family advocates. Anything that families need builds that connection, and reaching out across the stigma, which makes it feel like miles and miles, but reaching out and just showing up with some food is a wonderful first step.
Thank you so much for all you're providing. There's so many, unfortunately, I think the statistic is 1 in 3 have either experienced substance use or know someone that is. So if it's not yourself, chances if you look front, back, and to the right, it's going to be someone close by. And at this point, sadly, 1 in 10 families have lost someone very close to them. There's really no more even room for stigma. It just takes us standing up and talking, and the best thing that everyone could do to help is just to share your own story. Share one of your close friend or family. Resources that I personally found were sometimes when you're in such a dark spot, you don't necessarily want to go into a therapist, but there's online groups of parents all sharing similar things, symptoms and things that I thought maybe I was going crazy about. Turns out there's a lot of others, and just knowing we're not alone. As far as advocacy, I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, and I was able to network with the consortium quite a bit, and Denver Public Schools just welcoming me in and saying, share. We have other families that need something, and every outreach effort we do, about every 4th person coming up is either in active use, has worried about a friend or family, lost someone. So it's something where we're all united, and although we have experienced the ultimate loss, everyone in this room has probably experienced some sort of terrible grief too. So.
Now, my friend wrote this book about grief, and he quotes Helen Keller, and she said this about grief: the only way to get to the other side is to go through the door. And that's why he wrote this book. My friend passed away from cancer this past July. But for me, it was to really lean into it, to find a great group of people, to have that connection that could help me walk this path, to walk this journey, other sojourners, I call them, to make sure that it's somebody that can relate to me, maybe not the exact same situation, but a friend. He talks about having a truth teller, having a listener. And I've really, for me, to work on my grief journey, I've just tried to surround myself with those types of folks that are going to help me, that will listen and guide me through, even if they don't have the shared experience. And so I think resources in the community, grief recovery groups, are huge to go with other people that can understand what you're going through, because if you haven't gone through it, you just don't quite relate. But somebody else, like the Rounds, I know them, and to hear their story every time, and it just brings me back to that they get me. And we need to have that connection in order to go through this. What I've learned, it's been 3.5 years about, I'm not going to get through the grief journey, but I've made a decision to grow through it. And giving our testimony and sharing our stories is really helpful for me to be able to pay it forward. And it's hopefully helpful for you to hear these stories and go warn other families and take our stories to the streets to save lives.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just being able to talk about it will definitely help. Unfortunately, at that time, we didn't have any resources. We didn't know of any resources when our son passed away. So we kind of felt like we were on our own. We did have the family advocate come over, gave us some documentation of things to do, and never heard from her again. As Trish mentioned, okay, a couple days later, we're trying to still figure out what the heck happened.
and oh gosh, we have to contact the funeral home, set up all those. We didn't have a clue. So really just talking about it, letting everybody know it's okay to talk about it. We post on social media a lot of times about our son. We get 0 responses. I think that they just don't know what to say. They don't know how to express, their sorrow, or just even just saying, hey, it's okay. We can post something about our daughter who's 20 and doing great, and we'll get a bunch of responses. So it almost makes us feel like, okay, what is going on that you don't feel comfortable talking about a loss of a son, but you're okay talking about our daughter who's still alive. And so I think it's just having that knowledge and that information to be able to talk to the affected parties would be very helpful. And then another thing too is obviously stigma is number one, but getting those resources. Like I said, we had that the day of that happened, our advocate was there, but as he was saying, you're in a fog. You don't know what's going on. You have no clue of your surroundings. And so a follow-up a day or two later would have been a big help to us, just knowing our next steps, because even though 2 days later isn't a long time after a passing, you're still not as foggy as that day that you're going through that. You find your son dead, you're trying to give him CPR, you're calling the cops. I mean, there's just so much going on. So just giving that time, that extra step, that extra care to those families, I think would be a big help as well.
I don't have much to add to that, but I did want to say, speaking for my son, as I stated in his phone, is where we found a lot of what was going on with him after he had already passed. And something that that he was, talking to his girlfriend, who also died 3 months after he did. She was my biggest support system after Keith passed, and she also died from fentanyl 3 months later. But in that, she was telling me, because I was like, how did I not know? Like, how did I not know what you guys were going through? And she said, he was ashamed. Like, he didn't want to come to you guys for help. He didn't know who to go to for help. He thought he was going to look down on, and he was very ashamed, because he knows how proud of, like, just how you guys are and how you didn't condone drugs and alcohol and vaping and all that. And so part of that's our fault as his parents, because he didn't think he could come to us. So I don't really know what the answer is, but we got to do better for these kids.
I think it's unconditional love. And that's all we can do, just accept them for who they are. It's just that. In reading a couple of, there's so much flowing through and so much coming out of everyone, I almost don't know what to say because there's so much. I also read a book, The Choice by Edith Eger, about her time in Auschwitz and how she somehow got through it, losing her parents, and somehow surviving and pulled from a pile of dead bodies, and in the end becoming a therapist. And what she felt was eventually you have to embrace the whole thing. You have to learn how to let go of the hate. And so we have to let go of our fear and our judgment towards our loved ones to be able to help them. So how we take care of ourselves, connectedness again, how we bring connectedness to us, is to realize that we don't shame anyone for who they are in that moment. I look back at my daughter and I realize that my fear of losing her and my understanding of the risk she was under caused me to be under such stress that I loved her a lot, and I would tell her I love her, but she'd feel the tension in my voice. And I realize now, as I look back on the way my wife treated her brother, who had been a heroin addict and was an alcoholic, and he eventually died from that. But in the end, she just decided to embrace him and be with him anyway. She said, he's my brother. This is the last time I'm going to be with him, is right now on this planet until he's gone. So I'm going to love him anyway. I'm just going to accept him even with those. I'm going to laugh with him, and I'm going to have a good time with him. I think when we separate ourselves and say, my case is different, my case is the unjust one, you have to do that. You have to do that to take care of how you feel about this loved one you had, any of our children. But we also have to care as much about everybody out there, because everybody's somebody's kid. Everybody came from somewhere. And everybody's got somebody that cares and somebody that knows lost, almost everybody. And we've really, the only thing I know is to let go of all of that and accept everyone from every neighborhood, or even if they don't have a neighborhood anymore. And I think structurally, though, to answer the question, we need to make sure that we educate our leaders and help them understand this. The mayor of my town, when simply asked about Narcan, can we make sure we've got Noxalone available to everyone, said, we can't be engaged in that. Something to that effect, that people make their own choices. We can't be responsible for their choices. Well, I'll tell you what, is that ambulance out there? People made choices on the highway. We send an ambulance out after them when they make a bad choice. What's the difference?
Can we give a big round of applause to a very courageous, strong, and powerful panel? All right, the next one starts in 5 minutes, so feel free to stay in this room or go to whatever room is next.